You probably woke up this morning, went through your routine, and didn't think twice about why you do what you do. Work, relationships, goals, they all seem to have their own momentum, their own obvious purpose. But if someone asked you right now, why does any of this matter? You'd likely give an answer you inherited from someone else. Maybe you'd talk about success, happiness, making a difference. But Friedrich Nietzsche would stop you right there and ask a more unsettling set of questions. Whose idea of success? Whose definition of happiness? Making a difference according to what standard? Because over a century ago, Nietzsche realized something that's only becoming clear to most of us now. We're living by rules for a game that no longer exists. We're following a script written by authors who've been dead for centuries. And the most terrifying part? Most of us don't even realize we're acting. Nietzsche's infamous declaration, "God is dead," wasn't him boasting about atheism or celebrating secularism. It was more like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis to civilization. He saw that as science explained more and religion explained less, as traditional authority crumbled and old certainties dissolved, humanity was losing its fundamental organizing principle. For thousands of years, meaning came from above. There was a plan, a purpose, a reason for everything, even if we couldn't understand it. But what happens when you realize there's no plan? When you discover that the universe isn't a story with you as a character, but just physics and chemistry and vast indifference. Most people haven't truly grappled with this yet. They've stopped believing in God, but kept living as if He exists. They follow Christian morality without Christianity. They pursue success and happiness as if these concepts have inherent meaning rather than being inventions of particular cultures at particular times. It's like continuing to follow traffic laws in a world without cars. The behavior persists, even after its context has vanished. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? When Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, often translated as Superman or Overman, he wasn't imagining some genetic superior being. He was envisioning what humans could become once they accepted full responsibility for creating their own meaning. Not finding it, not discovering it, not uncovering it. Creating it from nothing, based on nothing but their own will and courage. Think about how you actually make decisions. You probably reference some internal compass. This feels right, that feels wrong. But where did that compass come from? If you trace it back far enough, you'll find it's calibrated to values you never chose. Maybe your parents instilled them, or your culture, or your religion. Even if you rejected your upbringing, you probably defined yourself in opposition to it, which means it's still controlling you. You're either following the script or deliberately doing the opposite. Either way, the script is directing your actions. This is what Nietzsche meant by slave morality. It's not about literal slavery, but about living according to values imposed from outside rather than created from within. Even rebellion is a form of slavery, if you're rebelling against something rather than creating something new. The punk rocker who does everything to shock conventional society is just as controlled by that society as the conformist. They're just reading from the negative image of the same script. You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. This terrifies people. We want there to be a right answer, a correct path, a universal truth about how to live. But Nietzsche saw that this desire for external validation is precisely what keeps us from becoming fully human. As long as you're looking outside yourself for meaning, you're avoiding the fundamental task of existence, creating your own meaning. But let's be honest about what this entails. It's not some liberating journey of self-discovery where you find your passion and live happily ever after. It's more like standing at the edge of an abyss and realizing you have to build your own bridge across. and there's no guarantee it will hold. Most people would rather pretend the abyss doesn't exist, or wait for someone else to build the bridge, or just stay on this side forever. Nietzsche identified 3 stages of spiritual development: the camel, the lion, and the child. The camel represents most of us beasts of burden, carrying loads of thou shalts through life. We bear the weight of duty, tradition, expectation, and call it virtue. We measure our worth by how much we can carry, how well we can obey, how perfectly we can fulfill roles we never chose: the good employee, the dutiful child, the responsible citizen, all camels. All carrying weights that someone else loaded onto their backs. The lion is the spirit of rebellion. It roars no to external commands, tears down old values, and creates freedom through destruction. This is where many people get stuck in perpetual rebellion, defining themselves only by what they reject. The atheist who can't stop talking about God. The rebel who needs something to rebel against. The critic who can only tear down, never build up. The lion is necessary. You can't create new values without destroying old ones, but it's not sufficient. The child represents genuine creation. Not childishness, but the capacity to create values playfully, experimentally, without needing cosmic permission. The child doesn't rebel against the old values because it has forgotten them entirely. It's too busy creating new ones. This is what Nietzsche envisioned: humans who create meaning as naturally as children create games, with the same joy, the same absorption, the same lack of self-consciousness. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos isn't confusion, it's potential. It's the raw material of creation. But most people are terrified of this inner chaos. They'd rather have false order than genuine disorder. They'd rather follow dead rules than face the creative void. They'd rather be told what their life means than decide for themselves. They cling to routines, relationships, and beliefs not because these things fulfill them, but because they provide structure in a structureless universe. Here's what's particularly cruel. The very education system designed to help us understand the world often prevents us from creating meaning. We're taught to analyze, criticize, deconstruct, but rarely to create. We can explain why every meaning system is historically contingent, culturally relative, probably false. But this leaves us paralyzed. We're too smart to believe in anything, but not brave enough to create new beliefs. We're philosophical enough to see through every illusion, but not strong enough to create necessary illusions of our own. God is dead wasn't a celebration, it was a diagnosis. And Nietzsche saw the symptoms spreading: nihilism, the belief in nothing. But he distinguished between passive and active nihilism. Passive nihilism says, nothing matters, so why bother? It leads to what Nietzsche called the last man, someone who seeks only comfort, entertainment, mild pleasures. No risks, no growth, no creation, just existence. The last man asks, what is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? And then blinks, having given up on all of it as too difficult, too dangerous, too demanding. Look at modern life through this lens. People working jobs they don't care about to buy things that don't fulfill them. Relationships maintained out of habit rather than passion. Dreams deferred indefinitely in favor of security. The endless scroll of social media, the binge watching, the constant distraction, all symptoms of passive nihilism. We're amusing ourselves to death because creating meaning seems too hard. We've become experts at killing time, which is really just another way of killing life. But active nihilism is different. It says, nothing inherently matters, which means I'm free to create what matters. It clears the ground for new construction. It embraces the destruction of old values as liberation, not loss. This is what Nietzsche advocated. Not believing in nothing, but using that nothing as a blank canvas for creation. The active nihilist doesn't mourn God's death, but sees it as humanity's opportunity to finally grow up, to stop being cosmic children waiting for parental approval, and to become creators in our own right. What does not destroy me makes me stronger. This isn't a platitude about resilience. It's about how meaning is forged. Every time you survive something that could have broken you, you create value. Not because suffering is inherently meaningful, but because you transformed meaningless suffering into meaningful strength. You become an alchemist of experience, turning the lead of random events into the gold of personal significance. But here's what Nietzsche understood that self-help gurus don't. This alchemy isn't positive thinking. It's not about finding silver linings or believing everything happens for a reason. It's about creating reason where none existed. It's about imposing your will on chaos, not discovering hidden order. The meaning doesn't pre-exist your creation of it. You're not uncovering some cosmic plan. You're writing the plan as you go. Become who you are. But who are you, really? Strip away your roles, your habits, your inherited beliefs. What's left? Nietzsche's answer: will to power. Not power over others. That's a crude misunderstanding that led to terrible historical distortions of his philosophy. Will to power is the drive to overcome yourself, to create beyond yourself, to expand what's possible for a human being to be. It's the force that makes the artist paint, the athlete train, the thinker question. Not for external rewards, but from an inner necessity to grow, to express, to become more. This is why Nietzsche valued struggle, conflict, hardship, not because he was sadistic, but because these are the conditions that force creation. Comfort breeds stagnation. Safety enables sleepwalking. Only when pushed to extremes do we discover what values we're willing to create and defend. Only in crisis do we move from camel to lion to child. A life without challenges is a life without growth, and a life without growth is barely a life at all. There are no facts, only interpretations. This isn't relativism, it's responsibility. The facts of your life are what happened. The interpretation, what it means, is always your choice. Lost your job. Fact. Failure or opportunity. Interpretation. Someone betrayed you. Fact. Unforgivable wound or lesson in human nature. Interpretation. And these interpretations aren't just mental exercises. They create the reality you inhabit. They determine whether you're living in a tragedy or an adventure, a prison or a playground. The eternal recurrence, Nietzsche's thought experiment, where you must live your exact life, infinite times, forces this responsibility into sharp focus. If you had to live every moment on repeat forever, what would you change? More importantly, what would you affirm? The test isn't whether your life is objectively good, but whether you can will it, choose it, create meaning from it. Can you say yes to your life so completely that you'd willingly live it again, exactly as it was, forever? Most fail this test. They live lives they'd never consciously choose because they never chose them in the first place. They drifted into careers, relationships, beliefs. They followed paths of least resistance and called it fate. Now, they're trapped in loops they'd never create, but lack the courage to break free. They console themselves with someday, and if only, never realizing that these are the chains that bind them to lives they don't actually want. Amor fati, love of fate. Not passive acceptance, but active affirmation. It means saying yes to everything that made you who you are, because without it, you couldn't create who you're becoming. The pain, the loss, the failure, all raw material for meaning creation, not because they're good in themselves, but because you can transform them into something valuable. The artist doesn't complain about the darkness of the paint or the blankness of the canvas. These are the necessary conditions for creation. This is perhaps Nietzsche's most radical insight. Meaning isn't discovered, it's created. For centuries, human beings assumed that the purpose of life was written somewhere outside themselves. In the stars, in scripture, in the natural order, in divine law. We looked outward for orders, for validation, for cosmic instructions, but Nietzsche shattered that illusion. He declared, "There is no pre-given meaning waiting for us to uncover. Meaning is not found, it is forged." And this act of forging is always an act of will. It is arbitrary in one sense, because the universe doesn't hand you a certificate of authenticity when you create. There is no cosmic guarantee that what you choose is the right value. And yet, in another sense, it is the most profoundly necessary act you can perform, because without it, you are nothing but driftwood in a meaningless sea. Think of the artist. The painter does not paint because the universe demands it. The painter paints because that is what makes her human. The ability to impose form on chaos, to bring order to blankness, to pull beauty out of nothingness. The lover does not love because it was scripted in the heavens. The lover loves because loving is itself an act of creation, an affirmation of life, an act of saying, "This matters to me." Nietzsche's insight is that human beings are meaning makers, not meaning discoverers. We impose patterns onto chaos, not because the patterns are eternally true, but because the act of patterning is life itself. Life creates, and when we create, we are most alive. But here lies the crucial point. Creating your own meaning does not mean anything goes. It is not a license for laziness or nihilism. It means you take full responsibility for what you create. You can no longer shift the burden onto God, or society, or biology. You cannot say, "I am this way because I was told to be this way." You cannot blame destiny, or tradition, or divine decree. When you create your own values, you must own them. They are yours. No excuses, no scapegoats. And that is terrifying, because freedom, real freedom, is not the absence of rules. It is the acceptance of responsibility. It is so much easier to live by commandments someone else carved into stone. It is so much easier to inherit goals and traditions and rituals and simply walk the path laid before you. That way, when life feels hollow, when the promises break, you have someone to blame. You can say, "It was God's will," or "It was society's fault," or "Nature designed me this way." But Nietzsche looked deeper. He saw that humanity is not meant to remain passive carriers of second-hand values. He wrote, "Man is a rope stretched between animal and Superman, a rope over an abyss. The animal lives without questioning, content in instinct, content in immediate pleasure and survival. The Superman, the Übermensch, lives by values he himself has created, values chosen with awareness, values affirmed not because they were handed down, but because he willed them into being. Most of us are suspended in between, stuck on the rope, no longer able to go back to unconscious animal existence. We know too much, we've seen too far, but too afraid to move forward into the terrifying responsibility of self-creation. So we dangle, paralyzed, suspended above the abyss. We call it anxiety, we call it depression, but often it is simply the fear of freedom, the terror of having to choose. Nietzsche foresaw where this paralysis would lead, a world of what he called the last men. The last man is not a monster. He is not a tyrant. He is worse. He is comfortable. He is small. He is satisfied with mediocrity. He no longer asks great questions because great questions demand suffering, and suffering feels pointless without cosmic meaning, so he avoids it. The last man seeks only comfort, security, and small pleasures to fill the void. He lives for the weekend, for retirement, for the next vacation, for the next distraction. He no longer asks, "Why live?" because the very question terrifies him. Instead, he anesthetizes himself with consumption, gobbling up products, experiences, entertainment. The last man is the ultimate consumer, filling his days with things, stuffing the meaning-shaped hole in existence with shallow pleasures. But consumption can never replace creation. No gadget, no luxury, no perfectly optimized routine can substitute for the human task of forging meaning out of chaos. The last man confuses numbness with happiness. He is not alive, he is sedated. He thinks he has found peace, but he has only found a comfortable form of death while still breathing. And you, if you're listening, if you feel the pull of something more, you know that this is not enough. You know that somewhere inside, you are called to more than mere sedation. You face a choice. Continue living by inherited values, ghost rules, dead gods, or accept the terrible freedom of self-creation. Stop asking, "What is life's meaning?" and start asking, "What meaning will I create?" Stop waiting for purpose to fall into your lap like a revelation, and start hammering purpose out of raw existence. Stop hoping for cosmic validation, and start validating yourself through acts of creation. This path is not easy. Nietzsche himself struggled under the weight of it. His philosophy pushed him into solitude, into loneliness, into confrontation with the abyss, and ultimately into madness. That is the risk of radical freedom. It can break you. The responsibility is crushing. The loneliness immense. The tension unrelenting. And yet the alternative is worse. The alternative is to live someone else's life, to die with someone else's values, to never become who you are. The alternative is to remain forever a camel, in Nietzsche's metaphor, carrying burdens you never chose, trudging toward destinations you do not desire, living by rules that were never yours. Your life is a canvas. Most die with it blank, waiting for a divine hand or social authority to tell them what to paint. But you have the brush. You have the colors. You have, whether you want it or not, the terrible, wonderful freedom to create. Yes, it is arbitrary. Yes, it is ultimately groundless. But that is not an excuse to create nothing. That is the very reason you must create something. Because in a universe without inherent meaning, the act of creation becomes the highest meaning possible. This is why Nietzsche's challenge is so profound. He is not saying life has no meaning. He is saying the opposite, that the creation of meaning is the most meaningful act available to us. Meaning is not discovered like buried treasure. It is sculpted like marble, painted like canvas, lived like poetry. So the question is not, does life have meaning? The real question is, do you have the courage to create meaning? Do you have the strength to be your own God? Do you have the will to transform chaos into form, to turn abyss into art, to take responsibility for the values by which you live? In Nietzsche's language, will you affirm life, even in its chaos? Will you say yes to existence, not because it is justified by heaven, but because you have justified it yourself through creation? And here's the final turn. The answer is not in these words. It is not in philosophy. It is in your next choice, and the one after that, and the one after that, until choosing itself becomes your meaning, until creating becomes your purpose, until you, in every act, become who you are. Not a passive discoverer of prepackaged meanings, but a creator of new meanings in a universe that offers none but demands all. So the question remains, what will you create?